out to a music store and I saw this little Pro Junior here for $4.99. I plugged into it, and at the store it sounded really good, but I figured I'll get it, I'll bring it home. If it sucks, I'll just come back and change it. And man, let's just say it's become one of my favorite amps very, very quickly. And the first lesson I got from this amplifier is the old adage, the keep it simple, stupid. You know, something that I thought I was doing, but it really wasn't. So this amplifier is as bare bones as it comes. You have a volume and a tone and the on-off switch. That is it. It has a 10-inch speaker. The one in here is a Eminence. I don't remember the model exactly. Some people online said was like the P10R, but I'm pretty sure it's not the P10R. I looked at that speaker, and this one here I think is a special design Eminence, which just means probably lower cost. But even then, it sounds fantastic. I have amplifiers that have 2 channels. Sometimes they have channel switching abilities where one is clean, the other one's dirty. The problem with that is that oftentimes those channel switching amplifiers, in my experience, is that one sounds great and the other one doesn't sound so great. What do I do then with an amp that only has 1 channel? Well, I'll come back to what some of the old cats used to do, which is to basically bring the amp up to a certain level of saturation. And then I roll off the volume for clean. So let's say I go over here. That simple. Now, playing is not too great this morning. I've been struggling with my hand a bit, but it's getting there. I'm warming up. So basically, this kind of tone, which works for like 90% of what I do. Now, if you notice, you're like, hey, there's no microphone in front of this amp. How are you getting this tone? I'm gonna get to that later in the video, which is very interesting. But for now, what I'm gonna do is just talk about some of the simpler stuff that I've kind of remembered over the last few weeks. Stuff I used to know, but you kind of dismiss it and you go down the modern route of having all these different pedals. So in front of me, I have a very simple pedal board. Not something I would use live, but something for this demonstration. With this kind of tone, I could use the Tumnus. So I get a great bass tone, and I can just stack something like a Klon type overdrive, a Tube Screamer, or the Boss Blues driver. Just something just to add just a little more cut. It also works great with fuzz. So that's the Hagerman fuzz. I also have the Boss OC3. Now, if I want to, I can layer the Boss Blues driver right on top. And even though I have a lot of gain right now, I'm using the NUX analog delay, and I have the mix down fairly low. That way, I'm not really clipping the repeats. And like I said, I don't need the channel switching. All I got to do is just lower the volume on the guitar. It's kind of a back to basics for me with this amplifier. It sounds great. I'm squeezing about 90% of the tone with just the guitar and the amplifier, and anything I need extra, I'm using a few select pedals, and that is it. So I'm back to the concept of keep it simple, stupid. Lesson number 2 is actually something I used to know, kind of forgot over the years, and I'm really glad I got reminded of this very important lesson. Sometimes a small amp sounds big in a mix. And you're probably thinking, how would that work? Like, if it sounds big in the room and you trust your ears and you put a microphone in front of it, it should translate into a big guitar in the mix. But the truth is, we have drums, which cover a lot of low ends, some mids and some highs. Sometimes you have keyboards, you may have another guitar, you have your singer. So you need to carve out a very specific space for your guitar to fit into the mix. Something like the Pro Junior or like a Fender Champ, you slap a mic in front of these and they don't have a lot of low end, they don't have a lot of high end, and they have a very specific mid frequency, which sometimes allows you to cut through the mix. So now I don't have a song I can play over, but I do intend to write a few, make a video, and I can show you what that sounds like. But this kind of tone, now that sounds kind of thin, and you're going to be like, okay, it's got like this kind of spiky treble to it. But believe it or not, that kind of tone sounds far better in a mix than something that sounds full and lush. So you take an SM57, you throw it at the front of an amp like this, and you don't have to overthink the mic placement. You usually hit record, you go and listen, and in a mix, you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how easily something like a small, either 1 8-inch or a 1 10-inch speaker can sound in the mix. And like I said, if you're interested in hearing that, you can subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up. I have an entire series, actually I have 12 videos all about this amp. Home recording is part of the series, and I'll show you what an amp like this, without overthinking, can sound great in your own production. Now the cool thing about the Pro Junior, or any amp just like it, small tube amps, is that they are great with fuzz. If you use high headroom amplifiers or amps that are 50 watts or 100 watts, typically you're going to struggle to get those to cut through the mix because they produce a whole lot of low end and high end, and they don't have a whole lot of mids to talk about. If you use something like this amplifier, it has just that 1 10-inch speaker that can't produce a whole lot of low end, and it doesn't produce a whole lot of high end. So that means you have more mid frequencies to play with. You could use a tube screamer, a clon to even push it further, or you can go in post and add them in if you want to have more mids. But I find the mids to be quite suitable just like this. So what I have here is this type of tone. So the amp is at 6 on the volume and at 8 on the tone. So I'm getting a bit of clipping here, not a whole lot. No one would call this like super distorted. But that's just enough clipping to make that fuzz kind of glue in a little better with the amplifier and the overall tone. What I got here is the fuzz from Hagerman. It's a silicon fuzz, super cool, and all there is a level and tone, so the gain is basically maxed out. It's a fuzz face type of pedal. So it's going through the amp with those settings. Let's have a listen. So as you can hear, that's pretty cool. I'm going to be using now the Boss OC3, so that's sort of a fuzz mixed in with octave pedal. There's only one of the settings that has the fuzz, but that's the one I'm going to be using. So I'm going to turn this one off. So I just demonstrated what this amplifier sounds like with fuzz pedals. Usually fuzz can be an indication that maybe your amp doesn't like pedals all that much. If it sounds too compressed, it lacks some of the frequencies you would expect to cut through the mix, perhaps the amp doesn't like fuzz. This one does, which implies that it plays well with pedals in general. So right now the simple board I have in front of me has an analog delay from the UX. Super simple delay pedal. I have the amplifier set at 4. It gives me a clean tone, especially with lower output pickups. So that's not a problem. I have the mix right now at around 9. Obviously, I can increase it, but that's not going to change very much because the amplifier isn't clipping the signal. So whether you're using reverb or delay, this amplifier can take time-based effects no problem. But what about something like the Boss Blues Driver? Now I'm going to have to set it because I kind of forgot to do that. So right now it's off, now it's on. So I have the gain at 9, the tone in the middle, have the volume in the middle, and I'm not using the custom mode, I'm just going with the traditional sound. Still getting that chimey, kind of smallish sound from the amplifier, but you can get some gain at a reasonable volume, and it sounds great with something that I think just about everyone's tried. If you haven't tried the Boss Blues Driver, definitely try it. But it sounds great with that. I was expecting the mids to be heavily affected by this pedal. Not an issue whatsoever. So what about something like a tube screamer or a clon? What does that sound like? So right now I'm going to set the clon, so, well, it's a Tumnus, it's not a clon, but you know what I mean. I'm going to set the Wampler Tumnus Mini so it has just a bit of saturation in it. That way you can tell whether it cuts through the mix or not. You're going to hear, obviously, a difference in the mids. So right now I have the gain right at noon. I have the level just below 9, so almost 8-ish. And I have the tone at 1. So that's the Tumnus. Let's go back to the Blues Driver. So right now I have the gain at around 11 and the volume back at 11. So right now I'm stacking the Tumnus into the Blues Driver. This little amplifier here doesn't have a mic in front of it. How am I getting this tone? So I said at the beginning of the video that I would explain how I'm doing it. There's no trickery. It's just something that a lot of people use. I'm using the Two Notes Captor X. If you play at home and you need something where the amplifier needs to be attenuated, if you are doing home recording, if you're playing live, something like the Captor X makes a lot of sense. So obviously this is a 15-watt amp. If you want to get all the clipping from the amp itself, you need to open up the volume. It's a non-master volume amplifier. You would be kind of surprised if you've never played a Pro Junior how loud it gets. It gets really loud. Now I have a home, I have a whole lot of like 70s shaggy carpet. I have these tile roofs here where there's a lot of dead space between the roof and the flooring upstairs. So that means that I can still open it up and get kind of loud without bothering the neighbors. But in the room with it, it's loud. So what I'm doing is I'm just unhooking the speaker from the Pro Junior. I have a speaker cable going from the amp to the Captor X. If I wanted to, I could rehook that speaker to the Captor X and send the signal back out to the speaker in the amplifier. I'm not doing that in this case. What I'm doing is using an XLR out of the Captor X to my audio interface, and I'm using wall of sound. I have different impulse responses. So right now I'm using the P10RF from Jensen. That's what you've been hearing for the entire video. I don't know if this is a go-to speaker. I think a lot of people go for something like the Celestion Greenback 10-inch version. I've read the Raging Cajun is another popular one. I'm not there right now. I kind of like the stock speaker. I think I said at the beginning of the show that I was going to put it on screen. I think this is a special design eminence. It's not the P10R as I've read online. That doesn't really matter to me because I don't really need to buy a speaker right now. Going out of the amplifier to the Captor X and then using wall of sound, I can use pretty much any speaker configuration and microphone I want, which is very convenient if you do home recording. And it's also especially important if you're on a silent stage. You don't want to use something like the HX Stomp, the Kemper, Quad Cortex, you name it. If you don't want to go down the entire like digital route, you still want to have some analog, but with the convenience of digital, this is a great way to do it. Now for live, if you were to use a more traditional setup, just that amplifier with a mic in front of it, if you had to be quiet, you would have to be very close to the amp because it's super directional, meaning that if you move a few feet to the side of either side of the amp, you're probably going to have a whole lot of dropouts where you're not going to hear yourself anymore. And if you move a lot and you need to go to one end of the stage, you play on bigger stages, which is not for everyone doesn't actually do that. Most people have like really tiny ass stages, but if you're like a pro level guitar player and you have bigger stages and you need to go do whatever you're doing with the bass player over there, just kind of leaning back doing that stuff, you're not going to hear the amp all that well if you're not using in-ears. If you're using two of them and you have them facing you, you could use them as monitors, which is a cool way to do it. But if you have the Captor X already, you could just use the same way I'm using it right now, which is plug in that speaker cable going to the Captor X XLR out to either front of house or an audio interface, whatever you're using for home studio or for live, and you choose whatever impulse response you want. Pretty simple setup. Obviously, the Captor X has a switch to attenuate the signal. So if you don't want to go completely digital, you just use it as an attenuator for home use. If you do it that way, you take the speaker cable out of the amp to the Captor X, and then you plug the speaker cable from the cabinet and you hook the speaker to it. You can attenuate quite drastically and get that nice saturation at really low levels, which can allow you to record it at low levels too. So I think if you're like, this amp is too small, I'm not certain that I could play with a band. I'm not sure I could play live in front of thousands of people. Remember that Jeff Beck, I mean, he's not nobody. Jeff Beck used to play with, I think, 2 or 3 of these, and he wasn't using the Captor X. I guess he was opening them up. So these things can be giggable, but if you're concerned about volume, if you're concerned about speaker choice, whatever it is, the Captor X can be a lifesaver. That's what I've been using throughout this whole video. And I find that there's not much difference from putting a mic in front of the cabinet. Obviously, I can afford to do that, and I'm going to be doing that later in the series, where I'm going to show you different microphones, how to mic it, one in front and one behind the amplifier, using a ribbon microphone with an SM57. So I'm going to delve into that further in the series, but for right now, I wanted to keep it super simple. So yeah, if you're worried that you won't be heard on stage or that you're going to be too loud on stage, the Captor X is great for that. You can send a great XLR signal to front of house. If you need to be super quiet, you can still attenuate and hear yourself straight out of the amp if you're not using in-ears. It's a great tool, and especially considering that any amp you plug through it, you're going to be heard in front of, with the front of house guy. And for stage, man, if volume is an issue, that attenuation on there is a lifesaver. So yeah, that's my tip for you. So the last point is, what about the 1x10 if you don't like that kind of sound? The amp is cool, it's small, it's portable, but you're not a big fan of 1x10 speakers. The cool thing is, especially with version 4s, that you, as I mentioned before, can unhook the built-in speaker and use an external cabinet. Now in this example, I'm using the external cabinet via the Toneworks Captor X, but in the physical world, you could use a different cabinet. Over here, I have a Vox AC50 2x12, which I've used, and it sounds mega with this thing. It's loaded with a greenback and a 70th anniversary. I also have a Mesa cab that's loaded with a UK-made V30. It sounds killer with that one. And you would expect maybe that the voicing of the amp is made to sound thin, so it fits with a 1x10 speaker much better than a 1x12. And I don't find that to be the case. So right now what I have is the Captor X. I'm using an Invaders 2x12 cabinet. It's a Belgian company that I've dealt with in the past when I used to live in Belgium, and they make awesome amplifiers and awesome cabinets. And the folks at Two Notes have done a virtual version of their very popular 2x12 cab. I'm going to write what virtual speakers are in there, and I'm using the SM57 and our R121 to get this particular tone. So the amp right now has the gain at 6. I'm on the neck pickup. Here's the bridge. I'm going to kick in the tumness just to get a beefier tone out of the amp. So as you can hear, this is not a bad tone. It doesn't sound like a kind of nasally and congested 1x10. Some people hate that sound live in the room, so it's a great thing to know that you could plug the V4, not the V4, but the 4 version of this amplifier to an external cab if you're not the biggest fan of the 1x10. The one downside to that, it means that you have to bring this amp and an extra cabinet, which kind of defeats the purpose of having something like a small portable lamp. But maybe for home use, you could do away with the 110 and just use an external cab. I find, again, not sponsored, just my opinion, that the Captor X kind of saves the day on that one, because you could literally plug this into any virtual cabinet that you want with whatever speaker combination you want and get a much beefier tone than the 1x10 if you're not a fan of that. Last tip, if you enjoy the sound of the 1x10, this amplifier and a Vox AC15 are a match made in heaven. I'm going to be showing that later in the series, where I'm using it as a wet-dry rig, and I'm probably going to experiment with stereo configuration as well. But there's something magical here that happens, in my opinion, when you have a 1x10 and a 1x12, and you have those two different voicings from the Fender and the Vox. I'm sure a Blues Junior would probably be a really great pairing too. I haven't tried that yet, but the Pro Junior and the AC15, wow, mind blown. Now, obviously, I'm sure if I was using a boutique fancy like amplifiers, I'd probably be like raving about those too. But these are common amplifiers. You can still find them on the used market. They're still being made today, so you can buy them brand new. So yeah, I have a whole lot of stuff. This is the first video. I have 11 more I want to work on. So if you're a fan of these amplifiers and you got great tips to give me, you can share them in the comments section below. If you're interested in the amp but haven't really like bought one yet, you're still on the fence, perhaps this series is going to help you make that decision. I find that going back to basics, scaling down a bit on features, and even on wattage, like I don't need a 100-watt amplifier. I don't play that clean to begin with. You kind of heard that throughout this video. So that's my take so far with this amplifier. I will be putting it to the test with other speakers, different microphones, different guitars. I've only used 2 guitars today because I wanted to keep it simple, but I have 9 other guitars to choose from. So I'm going to be doing that in the series moving forward. So you're going to get to hear it with classic pedals, budget pedals, the whole shebang. I'm throwing the whole thing at this, kind of like what I did with the Vox AC15 series. So if you're interested in that, don't forget that you can subscribe so that you can keep up with what I'm doing here at the Tone Lounge. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And in the meantime, YouTube tells me you might enjoy the video appearing on screen right now. So click on that one, and I'm going to see you in the next video. Cheers.